Welcome to the WTR Biotech Spotlight podcast. I'm your host, Tim Gerdeman, Vice Chair and Co-founder and Chief Marketing Officer of Water Tower Research. In today's podcast episode, I'm being joined by Erik Emerson, CEO of Apimeds Pharmaceuticals US, NYSE, ticker symbol APUS. Apimeds is a clinical stage biopharmaceutical company developing Apitox, an intradermally administered purified bee venom toxin for inflammatory conditions. Also joining us is my WTR equity research colleague, Do Kim. Good morning, gentlemen, and thank you for joining today's podcast.
Thanks, Tim.
Good morning, Tim, and I appreciate you guys welcoming Apimeds into your forum.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Erik, could you please discuss your background and how the company was founded, as well as providing a brief introduction to clinical drug Apitox?
Yeah, absolutely. So from my perspective, as far as my background goes, I've been in the pharma and biotech business going on about 23 years. Began my career as a sales representative and worked my way up through marketing and business development, commercial development. Launched a couple companies of my own and actually was recruited into Apimeds in October of 2023 with an objective of moving the platform forward for purified honeybee venom, or as you referenced, Apitox in the US. It really compelled me to kind of look forward at how we can bring forth a solution or at least an option of pain management for patients with debilitating osteoarthritis of the knee and potentially other afflictions associated with it. And the opportunity to reduce reliance on high-dose NSAIDs, corticosteroids, and potentially that transition to opioids with a naturalized solution of honeybee venom was something that was really just too compelling to pass up.
Great. I would be remiss if I didn't ask the following question. How does Apitox, a purified honeybee venom, have anti-inflammatory and pain relief properties when bee stings are more commonly associated with swelling and pain?
Well, I can tell you this, Tim, I don't think that that's the only time I'll get that question. So when you look at a bee sting, what you have is really the effect on that dermal layer from the actual activity of the sting. There isn't enough purified honeybee venom within one sting from a bee to create anti-inflammatory properties within the treatment of an affliction. But the itching and the swelling that you get is really from the activity of the actual sting and the stinger being planted within the body. The only sting you really feel from us is really the slight injection touch that you'll have from the intradermal injection and the administration of Apitox. But one injection of Apitox has the equivalent of roughly 10 to 15 bee stings. So you're getting a more purified and direct application of the amount of bee venom necessary to introduce the anti-inflammatory properties. From a specific scientific standpoint, what the research has shown over hundreds of years of utility and then some bench work is that what bee venom does is it affects the inflammatory cytokines of IL, interleukin beta, and TNF alpha. And these are two heavy drivers and cytokines that drive the inflammation within a lot of the osteoarthritis components, whether that be knee osteoarthritis, hand OA, or otherwise.
Really interesting stuff. I'm now going to turn the call over to Do Kim to ask several questions.
Thanks,
Tim.
Hi, Erik. Welcome to the podcast. It's great to have you here.
I appreciate the opportunity, and anytime I get a chance to talk about the project and what we're doing with honeybee venom, I'm super excited to be able to do that. So appreciate the invite.
That's great. Well, we definitely want to dig into a little bit more about your product and the development of it. First of all, how does this manufacturing process go for purifying honeybee venom? And you talk about that you don't get pure honeybee venom in a bee sting, but does the process also include removing certain components that could possibly induce the inflammation and pain in addition to that sting? Or is it just, like you said, getting the properties you want by managing the dose and the amount and the exposure levels?
Sure, great questions. So let's start at the top relative to the manufacturing process and excipients or otherwise that may be impacted. So in the manufacturing process, what we have are bee farms that then within those farms have an electronic stimuli that draws the bees to the bottom of the cage, let's just call it for lack of a better term, or the farm. And that then that triggers the bees to release their bee venom, which is then collected, and within that are the stingers. So once you've collected all of the honeybee venom from that action, the venom is then stored and shipped off to a facility for purification, which is really the removal of the stingers from that collection process. So now you're down to just the distilled and purified honeybee venom, which is then transmitted to our manufacturing facility and generated into a vial product with lidocaine to eliminate or minimize any effects of the actual intradermal injection. And to be clear, these aren't intra-articular or deep sub-Q injections. These are literally just pricks at the dermal layer relative to the injection of the honeybee venom. I think one of the things that I do hear is the concern around anaphylaxis or those patients that are potentially allergic to bees. So know that when we run the clinical trials, that's an inclusion-exclusion criteria. Everybody is tested before they're administered the honeybee venom in the clinic relative to a potential allergen to honeybee venom or bees in general. So that process is a relatively clean, smooth process. We make sure that patients, when they come into the trial, obviously are not associated with an allergen to bees. What's also interesting is there's a conception, right, that when bees sting, they die because they've gotten rid of their stinger and their venom. The reality is when they actually pull off of you is when the bees die, because they get attached to your body and then that opens up the rest of their system when they pull off of you. For us, we're just collecting the venom from the bees and then they're able to release and kind of recycle that process for them and generating more venom. So hopefully that gets at some of your core questions, Joe. It's a very interesting process and a really cool one, actually. And I think as we get further along and are able to kind of demonstrate and characterize that process for people, it will expound upon what is a tremendous opportunity for pain reduction in patients via naturalized source.
Well, it's great that you have a renewable source of your product and you're not actually sacrificing the bees in order to collect the honeybee venom.
Yeah.
And you talked about, yeah.
I was gonna say, it's interesting too, because, bees have been a cherished part of our world for a long time. And, one of the greatest responsibilities I think I have is taking what people have used historically for hundreds of years as a potential option for reducing pain and et cetera before the pharmaceutical world was advanced, and translating that into an actual distributed therapeutic that patients can take advantage of the natural resource there. So it's a tremendous responsibility, a tremendous opportunity, and we really look forward to advancing it along as best can with the greatest hope of getting it to patients as soon as possible.
And you talked about the risk of anaphylaxis with bee stings. And you screen out for that, but there is an association with someone who's never gotten stung by a bee that you may have an initial allergic reaction and that might escalate. I don't know if you have an answer for this, but is that a possible concern in your clinical trials that someone may develop an allergy and it may grow from there?
Yeah, I think it's a fair question. It's a question that will be a component of the protocol design and will replicate what was designed in the initial trial. And I think that, without having real specifics to go deeper into that, what we know about honeybee venom through phase 3 work and approval in Korea in 2003 out to today, along with all the trials we've run in the US, is that it's safe at every level. So it's incumbent upon us to ensure that when a patient comes into our trial, we know at each and every level that that patient has been cleared from an anaphylactic standpoint relative to bee allergen. So I think the simplest way to answer that question is nobody's going to get into the trial unless we have an actual confirmation that they have been cleared from an honeybee venom allergy reaction.
I think it's very important that you said that it is approved in South Korea, and you have conducted, well, the parent company has conducted clinical trials to support approval there. Could you talk about the efficacy that you've seen and the indication that it's approved in, and what has already been done to generate data for approval in the US?
Sure. So the data generated in South Korea is an approval for osteoarthritis of the knee. In 2003 is when it was approved. Subsequent to that, the company moved forward as Apimeds Korea in doing some phase 2 work and baseline work within the US to advance the asset forward. Beginning in 2013, they moved forward in a phase 3 protocol for the treatment of knee osteoarthritis, evaluating grade 1, grade 2, and grade 3 patients with a direct application of honeybee venom. That trial completed in 2016. Results were submitted and discussed with the FDA in 2018, at which point the FDA gave direction that the company would need a confirmatory trial and a second phase 3 environment to basically replicate the data that it had shown or the trends that it had shown in its initial phase 3 trial. So ultimately, a lot of the background work has been done across the board from South Korea early on into the advancement of the phase 3 asset in the US. Interestingly enough, based upon a lot of the safety data generated, we were able to get an open IND with a discussed phase 3 protocol with the FDA for an advancement into multiple sclerosis. So there's a lot of opportunities, but I think the important aspect of that is really the confirmation that we've seen from a safety perspective with the product, which allows it to advance its research wings, let's just say, for lack of a better term, and be able to evaluate the benefit it could bring patients across a spectrum of different opportunities of disease.
Right. And you said you saw positive data in the phase 3 in knee osteoarthritis, and that you need a confirmatory trial. So what exactly do you need to show in this confirmatory trial? Does it just need to mirror what you saw in the phase 3? And can you talk about that data? And I know studies in knee osteoarthritis are challenging. We really haven't had an approval in a while. So maybe go through what that needs to look like.
Yeah, I think, I'm always cautious in this respect because anything we do in advancing the product is something we need to have 100% alignment with the FDA on. And, we have no position right now as to whether the product is safe and effective for human use. What we know is that at this point in time, we've seen positive trends within the data in our prior phase 3 trial, showing some separation from a standpoint of WOMAC, which is a physical pain function score analysis, and seeing separation out to 15 to 18 weeks between the treated arm relative to purified honeybee venom and that of the control arm. So I think what is incumbent upon us is working with the FDA to design a protocol that advances off of that initial trial, right? Gives clear direction as to anything else the FDA wants to see, but also holds a mirror up to that data and is well represented and replicated so that we can move downfield.
Okay, I understand. And when you look at the treatment landscape right now for knee osteoarthritis, what do you see the advantage of purified bee venom over, let's say, the standard painkillers, or you have injectable therapies to replace the cartilage, maybe even steroids? How do you see the use of your potential drug over these others, or competitive landscape?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think that you step back and you look at the treatment cycle as a whole, and I think we have the potential to provide some relief to those early stage patients, grade 1. And just for context, it's really not a complicated evaluation as far as what the grades mean, but grade 1 is really, let's say that you're starting to feel some pain and potentially there's some degenerative properties there. Grade 2, that pain is starting to affect your quality of life and your day-to-day activities. Grade 3 is now you're really starting to progress towards that knee replacement surgery option. Grade 4, you're really in that position now. You're going to be scheduled and you're probably going to have knee replacement. So the reason I highlight that background is, it's important that we evaluate any option in the treatment of pain that can reduce high-dose steroids, high-dose NSAIDs, or the introduction of opioids into the environment for the patients that are afflicted. So I think that when I look at this, it's an opportunity to take a naturalized solution that has direct anti-inflammatory properties against the cytokines that drive a lot of the inflammation associated with osteoarthritis, to do it in a targeted, specific delivery environment. I think the ability to inject right at the site of pain, and I cringe a little bit when I use the word injection, because it presents a picture of a deep injection where we're really just talking about an intradermal level, prick. But if we can do that in a targeted site-specific application versus systemic ingestion that is going to process through and metabolize through our body to then find and try and afflict the site or the area of pain, I think that can be a tremendous advancement for patients. We have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of research to confirm that, but I believe that the application of that within our knee osteoarthritis program may lead to tremendous opportunities for things such as hand osteoarthritis, which is a challenging affliction for people as they age, and the lack of ability to use those digits as freely as previously before. So in summary, it's the site-specific, naturalized approach to direct delivery of an anti-inflammatory within that location that we believe has potential to really impact patients' quality of lives and keep them, distanced as much as possible from other treatments that may cause more downside effect to them.
Right, right. And I realize it's been challenging to develop another drug in this indication, because companies have pursued cell therapies and ways to regenerate growth, cartilage in the joints that's affected. Do you see Purified bee venom as main function just to reduce pain, or could there possibly be anti-inflammatory effects that slow down disease progression? Is that a thought, or just a possible bonus, but focus is just pain?
I think that the important thing to communicate within that question is, within our business and the pharmaceutical and biotech development business, it's important to draw clear lines around what you have the potential to do, so that you're not instilling false hope within people around what you think the product may be able to do. So I don't have any position or perspective right now on regenerative properties or the potential to slow disease progression. What I know at this point, and what I feel comfortable communicating, and what the thinking is that we're trying to prosecute, is that the inflammatory components associated with pain that patients are receiving can be directly tied to an increase in IL release and TNF release. We know we directly affect those cytokines relative to blunting some of the anti-inflammatory properties of that. So at this point in time, we're here to provide a more naturalized and clean solution to potentially reducing the advancement and the degree of pain that those patients are feeling. At this point, I wouldn't hearken to say that we have any regenerative or slowing of disease progression properties. We're there to try and help patients manage day to day and get more out of their life, than potentially they're getting preceding the use of honeybee venom. I will say also that knee replacement surgery, has come a long ways, and patients come out of knee replacement surgery in a much better place and are advancing to, a good quality of life. And I see our responsibility as one of helping patients in that situation and bridging them to what is the inevitable outcome there as far as knee replacement goes. So again, improving patient quality of life and doing everything we can to support physicians in that respect and provide a naturalized solution to do that, I think is a great charge, and it's something that we feel very proud of and are excited to do everything we can to help in that regard.
And it sounds like you're still in discussions with the FDA on the confirmatory phase 3 study design and what they want. And I don't want you to disclose anything you can't, but maybe you could talk around what is typically required in a phase 3 study to gain FDA approval. What endpoints they like to see in prior studies, secondary endpoints and such?
Yeah, I think that, I won't go into a ton of detail there because, the truth is that I have a tremendous amount and we have a tremendous amount of respect for the FDA. I look forward to FDA interactions, not only because it gives us guidance, but if you approach them right, you're going to come out of there with information that's going to help you build a program that's going to be successful. Because the reality is the FDA is there to protect all of us and help companies advance solutions that bring benefit to the entire patient population. That said, we'll look to target similar endpoints from a WOMAC pain and function and mobility standpoint. These are approved and standardized FDA endpoints when it comes to the treatment of knee osteoarthritis. If there's opportunities for us to have secondary endpoints that are informative to the patient and the physician community, we'll definitely do that. But our goal is to advance over the next month to 2 months in our framing of what exactly we want to generate out of that phase 3 trial, be very clear in our communications around what we learned from the prior phase 3 trial and feedback from the Food and Drug Administration, and present to them a program that prosecutes our thinking at a very high level and evaluates how we can provide the best outcomes so that patients can appreciate and understand the benefit that they're getting. And I say that because I think that's one of the areas where pharmaceutical and biotech companies can do a better job. And that is making sure that the evaluations that we're making during clinical programs are evaluations that translate clearly and effectively to patients. So patients understand the journey that they're going on and understand how the outcomes of those trials associated with the medications they're about to take impact their lives. And I think if we approach all of our activities with that end in mind, will be very successful. Now that success obviously is predicated on validating our thinking, around the pain reduction. But as I said, we've seen those trends in the prior phase 3 trial with separation out in all of the different areas, and making sure that we're having a good evaluation of those endpoints by grade of disease, so that we know if this is beneficial to grade 2, grade 3, and pre-surgery grade 4, and applying those strategies appropriately across those grades.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you. I feel that investors at times don't fully appreciate the quality of life and the patient-reported outcomes as much as physicians do, because it affects the patient's lives and how they're living and the effect of the drug just outside of hard clinical endpoints.
Well, yeah, I think it's a great comment. And when I think about it from the investor standpoint, I think one of the things I hope as investors look at our organization is they're investing in the process and the end game of what we're trying to accomplish. Investing in an indication or investing in, the outcome of a specific trial, to me, means that I'm not doing a good enough job of communicating our overall objective and vision. And our objective and vision is to take a product that has good regulatory protection, has a strong clinical background, and the ability to impact the lives of patients across many different fronts with validated data. And that's the vision that I'm hoping our investors look to and appreciate and understand. And when you go, and I'll lead you down this path because it's an interesting one, and it gives you a real sense of how deep the belief is in honeybee venom. And that is, you can go to YouTube or other instances and find patients raising bees on their own and stinging themselves with partners in areas of affliction, right? So whether that's multiple sclerosis, whether that's shingles, whether that's hand osteoarthritis, people will sting themselves 10 to 15 times with actual live bees to get the effect of that venom. So there's an appreciation and there's a passion and there's a conviction, and people are recognizing what they can get from this naturalized tool. And therefore, when I talk about, investors and how everybody looks at our organization, I hope that everybody continues to kind of lean back in their chair and take a broader view and understand we have a very critical job here at Apimeds relative to converting this into a delivering biologic that helps patients across the board and is a clean, naturalized version and its capabilities of doing that.
Yeah, great. I do want to touch a little bit on the other indication, and you mentioned it a couple of times, you gotten an open IND for multiple sclerosis.
Correct.
Could you talk about the approach in clinical development for that? I'm familiar with studies in multiple sclerosis, and it's focused on slowing down disease progression and annual attack rates. But here you'll be looking at something differently, and I would imagine that you would have to administer the bee venom differently than you would for osteoarthritis. Could you talk about how a clinical plan would look like?
Yeah. So the clinical plan in MS, and I think that this is where Dr. Chris Kim, our Chief Medical Officer, President of the Apitox division, his depth of experience and compassion as a physician and scientist really affects our organization and the way that we think about things. And by that, we don't have a ton of validated, clinically produced placebo-controlled data in MS, but we have that background and history of utility with our lead physician or our lead scientist. So I won't go into a ton of detail because I think it's jumping the gun relative to what that program will look like. But let me say that as we discussed during our registration statement and otherwise, the goal is to find a site that will operate a 25 to 30, 35 patient study at a single site with endpoints that have been clarified with the FDA, and really just prosecute, and I think that's the appropriate word when I speak of indications, because when you think about something and you want to understand its ins and outs, you're really going to prosecute that thinking, right? So single site study, 25 to 35 patients, looking to alleviate the pain that is associated with exacerbations of MS that can be debilitating. And we're not disease modifying. Again, as we spoke a little bit about previously with NEOA, our intent right now is not disease modification. And specifically within MS, it is to provide that pain relief or that symptom relief from exacerbations that are associated with MS that can really knock people out for, a good period of time. As you can imagine, the trial and the development in that area is a little more complex, requires a very sound process from our standpoint in evaluating what it looks like so we can determine what the next steps in the program would be. But in summary, it's a single site study evaluating our ability to reduce the pain associated with exacerbations of multiple sclerosis.
Great. Well, I look forward to seeing your progress, and I think we're getting close to time. So thanks, Erik, and let me pass it back to Tim if he has any more additional questions, and to wrap up.
Thank you very much, Joe. I really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure to be on with you.
Yeah, this has been really fascinating. Erik, in wrapping up, I know the company recently completed its IPO and listed on the NYSE, so congrats on that major, major milestone. How far does the company's cash position take it, and what milestones can be achieved in the interim, in your opinion?
Yeah, that's a great question. From a current standpoint, we're looking through the end of 2026 as far as the runway. Within that runway, we believe we can actually get out of the phase 3 trial in the osteoarthritis, or at least finish enrollment. I hate to be so definitive about those things at this point in time because we're very early in that process post-IPO. But ultimately, we'd look at entry into the phase 3 NEOA trial, the initiation of a single site study in multiple sclerosis, the initiation potentially of a single site study in hand osteoarthritis, and readouts from at least 2 of those 3 studies before we got to the completion of 2026 within that runway.
Excellent. Thank you for joining us today. Erik Emerson, CEO of Apimeds Pharmaceuticals US, NYSE ticker symbol APUS. And thanks to my equity research colleague, Do Kim, for also joining us. Finally, a special thanks to the WTR producer and editor of the podcast, Joe Brunetto. Thank you for listening, and don't forget to subscribe, as well as visiting www.watertowerresearch.com to stay up to speed on the company's small cap written research reports, podcasts, fireside chats, and conference schedules. We'll see you again for another edition of the WTR Biotech Spotlight podcast.